In the northern province of Nueva Vizcaya, 3 children died in 2 separate landslides and 4 others were injured, police told the Associated Press. An elderly person was killed in a mudslide in Barlig, a town in northern Mountain Province, according to officials. Another landslide in Labuagan town in nearby Kalinga Province killed 2 villagers and 2 others were missing, provincial officials said late Monday. More than 1.4 million people moved into emergency shelters or the homes of relatives before the typhoon made landfall, and about 318,000 remained in evacuation centers on Monday. Fierce wind and rain flooded at least 132 northern villages, including one where some residents were trapped on their roofs as floodwaters rapidly rose.
You beautifully write at the end of your book that the pursuit of alternatives to NATO is resistance against a world war policy. We need peace instead of NATO. Why did you write this NATO critical book now? And could you briefly present the main theses of the book?
Yes, very gladly. So why I wrote it? We are witnessing a NATO that seems to be at the peak of its power, namely on its 75th anniversary. It relies on escalation when you analyze what NATO is doing. Keyword: proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, complicity with Israel in this murderous war in the Gaza Strip against the Palestinian population, or the expansion towards Asia with a global claim to power, far removed from a territorial restriction to the North Atlantic area. And we must acknowledge that this NATO, which was completely renewed after the Cold War, is dangerous and is pushing us to the brink of a third world war like never before. We can also see this in the current debates. For this policy of escalation and expansion, NATO needs myths, legends, and fairy tales. The great myths of NATO are that it is a defensive alliance, an alliance of democracies and rule of law, and an alliance for the respect of human rights and values. And I believe that the prerequisite for seeing reality is to deal with these myths, to put the myths to the test. This is the prerequisite for having a realistic view of the military pact, which is nothing more than a war pact. Consequently, we must initiate the urgent discussion: what do we need instead? How can we establish peace and common security? This book is intended to serve that purpose. It offers a realistic assessment and analysis of NATO. Why was it founded? What are the big myths? What drives NATO? And then, of course, the leap to Asia, the expansion of NATO, and finally the outlook.
Eddie, what happened?
NATO is constantly expanding, but one place it hasn't expanded is Russia. We know that Russia has knocked more than once and asked if it could join when the Cold War ended. How do you explain that NATO seems to constantly need an enemy?
And one simply has to look at the founding of NATO. NATO was founded in 1949 by 12 states, led by the USA. The predecessor of this North Atlantic Treaty was the OAS Treaty, the Treaty of the Organization of American States. From the very beginning, especially during the founding phase, during the period of systemic confrontation with the Soviet Union, it was essentially always about establishing a Pax Americana, that is, creating an exclusive sphere of influence for the USA. This actually stands in contradiction to Russia, as the success